Hey, I'm Marty Friedel, and I'm here on the Ripples podcast today, being joined by Greg and Michael.
Hey, Marty, how's it going?
Hey, Marty. Happy to be here.
How you guys
See,
going
this
today?
is fun. This is fun. How are you, Marty?
This is good. We're going.
Excellent.
I'm going
well,
well.
at least Michael and I are on the same time zone now. You know, cross a little bit further west, and now got to figure out how to book meetings with everyone else around the country.
That's right.
Yeah, well, it's not too bad having an Australian guest. We've had some odd hours that we've had to put other people through because Michael and I won't get up at 3 a.m. to do a podcast.
Well, it's not so much that I won't. It's that my daughter's bedroom is on like the wall over there, on the other side of that wall, so I can't really talk in the middle of the night. I did a podcast like a year or two ago with Matt Stauffer, and like I picked up at 8 o'clock at night or something like that, or 9 o'clock, and he could tell straight away. He's like, "Do we need to record this at a different time?" I was like, "I mean, we don't have to, but if you can make it work at a different time, that would be good."
It's
so, you never know.
Yeah, it's the thing about being on the other side of the world. We're a Statamic partner as well, and there's partner calls every month. And most of the partners are on the other side of the world, whether it's in Europe or the US. So sometimes the most recent one was 11:30 p.m. and that was leading into a later start the following morning. But sometimes they're convenient for us.
Yeah. So we have Marty on. You mentioned that you are a Statamic partner, and we had you speak at Laracon AU last year on Statamic because as much as Statamic has been in and around the Laravel community for basically since the very beginning, really, with Jack and his team, other than Jack, I don't think many people really speak about it. It doesn't really get a lot of airtime at Laracon, so I thought it'd be good to kind of give it a bit more space to come out. And so that was why we had you come and speak last year, and that's really where our sort of relationship started. Probably this time ish last year when you put your submission in, and so I thought we would get you onto Ripples to kind of talk a little bit about your journey and kind of where you came from and how you kind of got to a position to submit to speak at Laracon, and then where you're at now on the other side of that.
I've been doing this sort of stuff for such a long time. So I think I started writing code. We're looking at over 20-something years now that I've been doing this sort of stuff. And technology shifted and changed a lot over that time. And I think the big one was I was very hesitant of change. I knew Laravel existed out there, but was stuck with some old code that I just couldn't shake, and kept doing things. Now, looking back, I now see it's a very inconvenient way to do things, and so it was just before COVID hit that we started doing some more Laravel dev, and we were actually having our carpet changed one day, and I was sitting on a chair in the corner of the room thinking I've got to find some sort of content management system, and found Statamic, and it ticked all of the boxes that we needed to do, because often we don't use templates for any of our sites. Everything that we do is always going to be custom designed. And I like that Statamic gives us the freedom and the flexibility to do whatever we need to do in whatever way we need to do it. So there's so many different ways to skin a cat. Sorry, I'll make sure that Zach, who's sitting on my lap, doesn't hear that. But it's given us a lot of freedom and a lot of flexibility with how we approach things. And it's made for a much more cohesive development experience. And I think that's really important too, is that, you're not fighting with the tools that you're using, because the tools are actually working really well for you and allow you to do some really cool stuff. And I think it took me a while to see the light, because I think you're very comfortable with what you're doing, and you don't like to rock the boat, but rocking the boat in this instance has been the best thing for, I guess, for our business, for my day-to-day work and sanity. I would say I lost my hair due to bad tech decisions, but I think genetics also plays a part of that too. I think I started working professionally, and then also worked at the University of South Australia for a while, and did some prac supervision and tutoring there, and even did some lecturing in the School of Communications at one point around interactive multimedia. And so that was kind of cool. And for years, I've just been prattling away on a blog of different things that I've learned or found, and I've always found that something may seem obvious for people, but you don't know it's obvious until you actually know it. And if I've been, writing code for such a long time and still having these questions that have been unanswered, some of that basically inspires where these blog posts come from, and what's being published. And it was this time last year we were actually heading off to the US for Flat Camp, which was the Statamic conference that's not a conference, which was in North Carolina. And you and I had spoken, Michael, just before that, and spoke to Jack McDade over in Flat Camp as well. And it was great to float some ideas around about what can be useful for the community to hear about Statamic, because I think so many people are a little confused when they first start looking at it, because it can be everything to everyone in so many different ways. But getting over that speed bump is kind of the big thing for people. And I think that my past with working at the university, with writing blogs, I've spoken at Joomla Day. Again, this was pre-COVID. People tell me I've got a nice voice, so clearly someone likes listening to it at least. I hear that with some of the classes I teach at the side job as well at the gym. So it's been a long journey to get here, but the last couple of years have just been fantastic from a work point of view, of feeling sane with the sort of things that we're doing, and how easy we're able to do some really cool things both in the Laravel space and by extension the Statamic space, given it's built on top of.
Yeah. So I think you and I met at the Tech Check-in at Laracon AU.
In Sydney, yeah.
Both of us, I think fair to say, a little bit apprehensive about jumping on stage. I don't know if we helped each other out or made each other feel even worse.
No, I think it was good. It's funny because I teach some classes at the gym, and I've got no problem with public speaking and no problem with getting up and being in front of people. But this was just so far out of my comfort zone, because I feel that in the group fitness space, when I'm teaching a class, I'm the one that's in control. I know exactly what's going on. But suddenly, being not only in a room full of people that I don't know, but also being filmed, knowing it's going to be watched by people around the world later, it plays on your head a little bit. It's a little intimidating, but the hype music that we had to pick. I heard my song start. I'm like, yeah, here we go, let's do it. And someone said to me afterwards, "Oh, you're actually speaking really quickly," and I thought, yes, I was. And then he said, "Oh, I know why, because I got to the end of the talk and I realized why you were speaking so quickly." But it was a combination of nerves and knowing that I had so much to get through in half an hour. But it was nice to be able to share that sort of experience with all the speakers. And I think, Greg, you and I had some really good chats even the night before at the dinner beforehand, which I think showed a lot of similarities between where we were in that sort of space too.
Yeah, I think both of us are, is it fair to say, veterans of the PHP sort of tech space, and probably had a lot of very similar experiences in the lead up to our career. I mean, for me, it was, playing around with software for more than 20 years, but now only just starting to tell people about it is, whereas you have a lot of people these days who are just starting out, and the first thing they're doing is telling people that they're like what they're doing, which I think that's probably a product of the younger cohort growing up in the sort of Instagram age and the sort of attention economy. Whereas, I don't know about you, Marty, but for me, it was, you didn't really talk much about your job. You just went off and did it. And for me, that pivot towards being more public is probably more nerve-wracking in a lot of ways than jumping up on stage. But I feel you about standing in front of like 400 people and speaking, or 350 people and speaking. It was I did the thought of it being recording didn't actually cross my mind until you mentioned it. I'm like, yeah, that's probably just getting flashbacks. But yeah, I mean, also I guess there's a lot of people who've paid a lot of money to come out and see the conference, and you kind of want to make sure that you're giving good value and that you're having enough content to make it worth their while, but also not too much content that you don't overload them. And there's a big release of energy once you finish doing it, because I mean it's not just 30 minutes; it's months of preparation.
I think that you've hit a really interesting point there with regards to content, because there are so many of the talks. I saw the titles for them in the lead up to Laracon and thought, oh, that one would be interesting, or that one I don't really think is applicable to me. But sitting down in the audience for everyone's talk in the lead up to mine, they were all fantastic, covering different topics that, if you were to be given a list of things to say, here, go and read about this, some of them wouldn't have been things that I would have considered reading or learning more about, but all of the presenters were so engaging in their own way with the content that they were providing. And regardless of what I do day to day, everyone's talk was brilliant. And I mean, even in some of the local meetups as well, one of the recent Adelaide meetups had a talk about something I'd never heard of before, and it was really, really interesting to learn something new that is something you don't really see in the Laravel space so much. If you're just doing PHP space, yeah, you might have been a little bit more aware of it, but you know, learning about different things that you may not already be aware of, I think has been really valuable. And I think something I'm trying to open myself up to a lot more is it's not just about, this is what I've got to do, let's get this job done, move on to the next thing, but also open up to different technologies, different ideas, different concepts, because everyone has so much information to give, and you don't know what you don't know until you hear something. And just provided, I think, so much inspiration for taking on new ideas, even this long in my career as well.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, and something from my perspective as an organizer is always a tricky balance, because there are, as Greg said, 300 odd people in the audience, and you're trying to find this cross section that goes through the majority of them, even if not directly related to what they do in their day job or what they think that they're interested in. You can sort of stay within like this medium, either side of it, where even though it's not directly related, it can still be an interesting thing to hear about. And so, I've seen, not only from AU, but I've seen for Europe and US, not so much India. I don't really hear too much about that. That kind of exists in a vacuum. But certainly for Europe and US, I do hear that people are like, oh, that talk's not interesting for me, or I wouldn't do that. But then on the other side of the conference and the other side of those talks, you hear the similar sentiment. Oh no, that actually was an interesting thing, because I think human beings and us, as tech people, even though something is not directly related to us, we can still be either challenged by it or informed by it. We can learn things that we weren't expecting to learn. And so this is why we kind of publish the schedule before we publish who the speakers are, because it kind of has a bit more conversation, a bit more thought about, do I want to learn about this subject, rather than who is delivering the topic. And that makes it a little bit easier. It's a little bit less pressure for those speakers, because there's no expectation that I'm going to see this speaker present, I'm going to see this topic is a little bit different. And that also helps, I think, the speakers to kind of work on their talks in a bubble, knowing that like they don't have this outside pressure. They're not going to see any commentary around their topics or anything like that. People will guess and whatnot, but being able to kind of have that intrigue from one side, and having the speakers kind of working in a little bit of safety and secrecy even is an interesting thing. So, but you're getting up on stage, as a first time speaker or as a 100-time speaker, it's interesting. I think, you as a fitness instructor, you are giving someone else's talk. You're presenting, like, this is the class that if you go to any of 100 or 1,000 whatever studios around the world, they're all being taught the same thing. Whereas you getting up on stage telling your story from your perspective in front of a crowd of people is a very different proposition.
I think it's really interesting that the connection there with the group fitness world, because you should be able to go to a class like a body pump class anywhere around the world and get the same workout. And while you may get the same physical workout, there's still a lot of personality that goes in. And I think that even goes for the speakers at Laracon or any conference too, that you could, I could give my material to someone else to get them to present, but they may not have my same sort of nuances or sense of humor and personality. And I think that there's so much individuality that comes up as well, that there's still a lot of freshness out there, and trying to make it unique and engaging, whether, again, that's a group fitness thing or whether that's a tech-based thing or just a speaking in general thing, making it engaging for people, but also still being true to yourself and the way that you would be speaking and connecting. And someone's actually mentioned to me in the past, when it comes to writing, she's now a client, and the reason we got the job over someone else who was actually cheaper than we were was because she liked the fact that she could hear me reading the proposal. So she could pretend she heard my voice and she could hear the words coming out of my mouth. And I think that sort of personality and individualism is really important, regardless of the topic too. It's hard getting up there and trying to be funny without trying to be funny, if that makes sense. Because you want to be engaging and not dry, but not have to feel forced. And not script your jokes, yeah.
Oh, that I know. The amount of jokes that I scripted for my welcome, and when you script them and you say them over and over and over and over again as you practice, it's a very different thing to giving it to an audience, and you kind of hope, right? You kind of hope that the joke lands with the audience, because by the time you give that, talk, before you deliver that line, before you deliver that joke, no one has heard it, no, and you've heard it 1,000 times, and so it's just worn off on you. So I think it's important that, practice and practice and practice and practice. But remember, while you're hearing it for the 1,000th time, the audience is going to hear it for the first time, typically once. They might go and watch the recording after, but they're hearing it for the first time. So practicing the delivery and the nuance of, how the words come out, and where the pauses are and where the inflection is on all of these things. Stick with it. Practice it until you're sick of hearing it, because when you get up on stage and the lights are in your face and the audience is sat in front of you, if you can reach into that place in your mind where you have practiced and you know exactly what you're going to say and how you say it, and all of that kind of stuff, then the fluidity of that presentation is what people will remember, on top of the content. If you go out and you've only practiced it 2 or 3 times and you've never given that talk to, I know that the speakers in Brisbane all got together a week or two before the conference last year, and they kind of shared their talks. They got feedback from each other and things like that. It's, you want to kind of get that feedback, but at the end of the day, it's the practice that is going to help you deliver that. You know what you're delivering at that point. Go out there and deliver it. Don't be sort of afraid of the audience, because for the most part, beyond the first 2 or 3 rows, you don't see too far back into the auditorium. You just see light.
I think that the one thing you forgot to mention there is the countdown timer. If you're someone who's trying to keep to time, having this big number right in your eyesight, counting down, and you think, oh man, halfway through my time, but I'm not halfway through my talk yet. That's the other pressure to deal with. Mm-hmm. In the group fitness world, when you start and go through your initial training, they do talk about scripting, and it's about scripting cues. And for a new instructor, I think it's really important to have that level of scripting, because there are things you need to say from a safety point of view, from a choreography point of view, especially if it's a pre-choreographed program, which is great. But in the real world, I feel that doesn't actually flow well. And I think that even comes back to when I was working at UniSA, where reading notes off of a slide, well, the audience can read the slide. You want to make sure the slide is a companion to what you're doing, rather than reading word for word. And it's the same thing with in the group fitness world. Every class I teach, I'll have a slightly different focus. There'll be a slightly different topic. So it might be on, timing, it might be on range, it might be on muscular activation, and that could be track specific or throughout the class. But then the next week when I go and deliver the exact same class with the exact same music, I'm not using the exact same cues. I'm changing the way and the focus and the purpose of the words, so that it is keeping it fresh, and keeping it, I guess, digestible as well, is probably the other tricky part. You want to make sure that whatever is being spoken is not too overwhelming for someone who's brand new to whatever it is, exercise, tech talks, that people are able to understand it and find those bite-sized pieces out of what you're saying.
Yeah, 100%. That is, removing the superfluous words, removing the things that don't need to be there to say the same thing
just like that, yeah.
Superfluously twice. Just like that as a perfect example. But also rehearsing and going over and over and over and over again, because you've effectively memorized lines at this point, and the delivery, and you're getting up on stage in a theatre. It is like a performing art at this point. It really helps to hone in the message. We've got the Laracon AU venue conference event details announcement coming out this Wednesday, or last Wednesday by the time anyone hears this podcast. So you will have already heard/seen it. And I did 58 takes of what ended up being a 15-second segment of video in the final take, like the final production. But 58 takes of scripting on the fly, of forgetting how to speak words in English, things like that. But at the end of it, like whatever take it was that ended up being used, that is the most concise version of what you're presenting. And I think maybe Greg and we spoke about this or something, or I saw it somewhere, where for like every 1 minute of final presentation that you have in your talk, in your presentation, whatever, you're spending an hour, I think, on refining that. So for a 30-minute talk, you're doing 30 hours of practice towards that talk, kind of thing. So, there is a lot that goes into it. Don't think that for a conference of this size and scale that you are going to just turn up on the day and give the talk. You're going to have, like, these speakers are practicing, they're giving the talk either at other events, or they're shopping at meetups, or they're practicing it with their friends or whatever else, that by the time they get on stage, they have invested a lot of time into it.
I think too, the practice thing, like, and I don't know if you have any similar thoughts on this, Marty, but one of my big fears was forgetting the work when I got on stage. And that fear kind of came true. Like, I don't actually remember being on stage. I completely blanked.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
But the fact that there was so much prep that went into it, and you mentioned the timer. Like, I had in all of my speaker notes a time index that sort of said you should be at this point on the clock by the time you get to this point. So I could constantly like check in with myself that I was like on schedule, that I wasn't rushing through it. So I take moments to slow down, or moments where I could speed up, and I had markings throughout the speaker notes that effectively said you could drop this in the moment if you're behind. The amount of prep you have to do, and some of that might be just overcompensating for the worst. But it's the amount of practice and preparation that you have to do to make sure that you give, perhaps not a flawless, but as flawless as possible presentation. This is why I can't believe people who do like live coding on stage. I think that just takes everything that makes this hard and makes it even harder.
Yeah, not even a little bit harder, but 10 times harder, 100 times harder. I think even with like time coding stuff, if you find, and this is something that only gets better with practice, unless you're like a natural at public speaking. Marty, you rushed and you were, speaking quickly. If you've got, like Greg had, time codes in your speaker notes of this is where I should be up to at this time, and you find that you're ahead of where you need to be up to, take a second to look at the audience, to to find moments of what you've said, to just let it sit. You don't have to talk for 30 minutes, especially if you're ahead. You can just stop, you can let it simmer, you can pick up your water bottle and have a sip. No one's going to think twice of the fact that, he's, been talking for 10 minutes here, he needs to have a drink, or she needs to have a drink, or whoever needs to have a drink. there are these things that you pick up over a long period of practice and public speaking that you can kind of just work in to what you're doing. There are lots of ways of creatively hiding the fact that you've lost your place or that you're ahead of schedule. If you're behind schedule, there's less to it. You might just cut bits of your talk out, but all of this comes down to practicing those things, and getting into a good space for being ready to go. And like once we lock in our speaker lineup, we've got like a Telegram chat that goes for the AU speakers, and we started that quite late last year, but we're going to start that basically from day one this year once we announce those speakers and they accept their invitation. So everyone will have the opportunity to get to know each other over a period of months before the conference, to if they're in the same city, to tee up maybe wanting to get together, or we can do Google Meets or whatever else. There is a tremendous amount of support amongst the cohort of speakers before and then after the conference, that this is a shared experience that you're going to have with these people for forever, basically. And so we want to try and make that a good experience for our speakers as well, because the more friendly I think that everyone is, the more cohesive that group of speakers is, and it also means that having some heads up of what the other people are speaking about means that if you're talking about tangential topics, or if you're talking about related things, if you're such and such said this yesterday, I want to expand on that, or here's my thoughts on that thing, it kind of makes the conference flow together a lot better. And that, from my perspective, again, as an organizer, and even as an attendee, it makes for a more engaging event, that all of these things kind of chain together.
Yeah, I think everything needs to flow and everything needs to have connection, I think, is probably the best word, between individuals, between talks, between the community as a whole. And I think I walked into Laracon not really knowing what to expect. And I am, this sounds a little weird, but I'm one of the shyest people you will probably meet. And I think even just the social side of it, of meeting new people and being around other people who know everyone already, I found to be really intimidating. But also through things like the dinner the night before and being able to hang out in the hotel before heading out, it was just really great to be able to break down some of those barriers. And it's not just about the speaking side of things, but there's also human beings there and hearing other people's stories and backgrounds and skill sets, and to be able to talk about things, I think really help create those connections. I mean, Greg and I have had quite a few chats since Laracon as well, on Telegram, which introduced me to Telegram. But it's been good to know that there are like-minded people out there who, this is almost just that little bump to, push you a little bit further, push you past where you normally would go. Because at the end of the day, we all like to do what's comfortable, and we don't like to move outside of that comfort because, well, it's comfortable for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And the older you get, the harder it is to find, like friends and support network. I find, I've got a wife and 2 kids, and that occupies probably the lion's share of my social time. So I don't have time to just randomly go out and make friends. So being part of a group, not forced into a group because it's a choice to go and do this. It's a choice to go and speak. It's a choice to put your hand up and put yourself out there. But, that can then turn into a network, and then that parts of that network become friendship groups. I mean, Michael and I speak on Telegram almost on the daily, just about all sorts of stuff that, conference related, or, ripples related, or mint slice related.
Yeah, it is.
Surely you can mute him, Michael. Don't you have the power to hit that mute button?
He's just going to use AI to make to change it to Tim Tams.
That's right.
The 10th best biscuit.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I'm in touch with the majority of the speakers. It's a bit more difficult for the speakers that come in from outside of the community, because they kind of dip in, they give their talk, they do a great job, but then, they're off to their own worlds, as Greg said. But for those of us that are in the Laravel community, that are going to be staying in the Laravel community. It's great to make that connection. And I think whether it's, Australia or the US or Europe, going to these conferences really helps you to meet other like-minded people. That's really what it's all about. And we're going to try really hard to afford attendees as many opportunities before, during, after, and beyond, the conference this year to really to have those connections and to find people, whether it's to make some new friends, to, share some ideas with, or if it's to start new adventures, if it's to, find work in the future, either, client work or a new employment opportunity. All of this stuff kind of starts from putting yourself out there at the conferences. So, at this point, people will have heard. I can't tell you two about it because it's still a secret at this point of recording. But people will have heard, what we're trying to do in more detail in terms of the networking. Like that was something that was mentioned by several people last year, that we didn't have the opportunities. So the theatre we're at, or the venue that we're at, has got heaps of room to mingle, to eat together, to speak together. After Dark is an incredible and fun experience, but it's it's loud and it's not the focus really to have those meaningful conversations. But we will make space for more low-key things to be able to do that this year as well. So I'm very excited to get that information out. I have dusted off and rolled out the marketing apparatus for Laracon AU 2024 today with what I don't. Someone asked me, like, did you come up with this or did you stumble upon it? And honestly, I do not remember. I just remember going, mate, and then just drawing the conclusion from there. And I just turned the camera on and I just recorded, like, how many different ways can I say mate, and in what different contexts can the word mate be used, which I thought was just a fun little thing, which then landed on mate becoming May 8, which is when we will launch the full Laracon website with all of the details about the venue, all of the stuff that we're doing around the conference this year. So I'm really excited to get that out. And I'm sorry to Stephen.
Oh, poor Stephen. So, Marty, we've spoken a lot about the actual experience. I'm interested in like what the sort of post-conference experience has been for you as a shy person who maybe wasn't putting himself out there quite so much. I mean, I think you've guested on a bunch of podcasts since, and you've moved house to made the big move south to Adelaide, and sort of rebooted your business in a whole new Marty cave. So what has the sort of post conference experience been for you?
I think it's still landing a little bit. Following on from what Michael was just talking about with regards to connection, I think my own journey over the last year and a bit, and probably year and a bit, has really been on finding quality connection. Life's too short to have connections that aren't providing value, whatever that is defined as for what a connection means to you. And so I'm originally from Adelaide, and coming back to Adelaide, to be closer to my folks, they're getting a little older, to be closer to my brother who's just had 2 kids, and finding that sort of connection. And I think it's really shifted the priority of what I'm wanting out of things as well. Being able to traipse around Adelaide really easily is convenient for that too. But I think, these small situations, talking to you two here today, is easy. I'm really great in a small group of people. You put me in a larger social situation, and that's where I really start to I think, get very uncomfortable very, very quickly. And that's something I've been working with my whole life. It's just sort of where I guess land in that sort of things. And that's where it's so bizarre, the fact that I have no drama with speaking in front of people. I have no drama with teaching a group fitness class. That part of things doesn't scare me at all. but yet socially I'm awkward and weird and quiet and shy. And finding those connections that are meaningful to help build me up as well. That everything's a little bit of a two-way street. And I think that's really been the big focus here, especially with the move, has been, connection. My oldest mate from university, so going back 20 something years, he's now dad with 2 kids, and he's 20 something minutes away, compared to a flight away. And that's a relationship that, even after so much time where he's had so much happen in his life, I've had so much happen, that relationship's still there. And I think that's going to be one that's there for life. So I guess focusing and reprioritizing what's important, that it's not just about work, it's about connection.
I think too, it's like getting in with a group of like-minded people. I feel the same way. I feel very weird and awkward, and I often wondered, how do you get into the sort of inside club, I guess, in the community? Not that there is really a club, but you sort of sit on the outside of this community and look into it and wonder, how do you sort of become part of what's going on? And realizing, like, through a conference experience like Laracon, and Laracon, I think, is special. I don't think every conference would be that way. I don't think all conference organizers go to the lengths that Michael does to make sure that everyone knows each other and are friends, but or friends by the end of it. But I think getting with a group of like-minded people and realizing that, the inside group isn't a bunch of very special influencers who are, different than you are or better than you are. And they're just regular people with, similar sorts of life experiences and similar hang-ups and similar, personality quirks. And I think it's really interesting to experience that and get a sense of belonging. It's probably something that stood out for me through my experience.
Yeah, the speakers aren't necessarily special or part of any inside club or anything like that. They're just the ones who put a submission in, and that submission was interesting enough to get selected to speak. If you don't put a submission in, you don't get to say, how do I get part of that club? How do I become you have to put the submission in. You have to put the work in. I had someone that submitted a couple of talks actually, and one of them I picked, and the other one I was like, I don't know about that. And they just out of the blue messaged me and said, "Hey, I'm really digging this other one," which they didn't know that I hadn't had any interest in. And they kind of fleshed it out a little bit. They sent me a voice message about what they were thinking and how they wanted to approach the talk, and I was like, "Oh, well, no, that is interesting," and they've got a much better chance now of being selected. And it's not to say that everyone has to do this, but if you are clear in what that abstract looks like, then it's much more likely that you get selected and you get to become part of that group of speakers. So you don't get to sit on the sidelines and throw shade at a conference because I'm not interested in any of those talks. Well, if you're not interested in any of those talks, then you have to be, part of the group of people that are putting up the talks that are of interest, because the things that interest you 99% of the time are going to interest other people. So, put yourself out there. In terms of like being socially awkward, I don't think that's a weird thing to say, amongst us 3 friends. It's not a weird thing to say in our community of like 400 strangers at a conference. We're all a little bit like that. And, I've been looking at how we can kind of break that ice a little bit for attendees. Not everyone coming knows each other. Some people are coming with a group of people from work. Some people have been to 2 or 3 Laracons now, so they might know a few people. But we had heaps of first timers last year, and so I'm looking at things like talking point cards and things like that, just like fun little things that we can put on the tables and go. People come around that and go, "What's this?" And 1 or 2 people like come up to that and have a look, and another person comes in, and this is how you kind of build those connections. Amongst people that may not necessarily know what are we going to talk about. Like, it's really easy to walk up to someone that's kind of standing on the side looking lost or like they don't know what to do, and say, what what was your favorite takeaway from Greg's talk last session? Or, what have you learnt about Statamic from Marty's session? Like there's these easy things in the conference setting. Like everyone's got a common point of reference to start talking, and like conversations just go from there at that point. It's I think conferences like this with like-minded people are easier than ever, believe it or not, as socially awkward as you think you might be, to have great.
So actually, one of the really interesting stories that's just flashed into my head since you mentioned that, and I agree with you, by the way, if you're going with a group and you got like 3 or 4 work colleagues and you see someone who's out on their own, just like adopt them into your group. But I went to lunch on the first day of the conference, and I went to lunch with a bunch of people that I didn't know. So I went to lunch with Daniel Colburn, who I had a few conversations with beforehand, and I think a few of the other speakers came along as well. And this gentleman who I think was from Japan, and his name has dropped out of my head, so I'm very, very sorry if you're listening. Followed us into the restaurant and sat at our table. Like, so it was a whole bunch of speakers and this guy. And Daniel and he started speaking in Japanese because it turns out Daniel spent a lot of time in Japan in his youth. And it was really great. So, I mean, I think putting yourself out, if you're not yet quite ready to put a talk in, just put a talk in. But if you're not quite ready to do that, this is a group, like, by and large, if you drew the sort of Venn diagram of people who have varied interests, this is like a very, very tight intersection of all of your interests. There's a very, very, very high chance that 90% of the people at the conference are going to be your friends, like whether you know it or not. So, putting yourself out there might not be about being brave and standing on stage. It might just be that group of people looks really, really interesting, or that group of speakers looks really, really interesting. I'm going to follow them to lunch and have a chat with them, or I'm going to bail them up for a coffee, or I'm going to ask them to do some activity at after dark. You don't have to stay. It's very, very safe, and it feels very, very safe staying within your group. But the dirty little secret is that everyone at that conference is your group. It really is. Like, they're all Laravel devs. They're all probably in the same broad parts of their career that you are. They use the same tools. They have the same interests in a lot of cases. So there's a really great sort of shared understanding there that I don't think everyone realizes. Well, doesn't necessarily realize is there.
Yeah, 100%. Wonderful. Well, I think that is a good place to wrap. I think we had some conversations there about putting yourself out there, about attending conferences, which is obviously big in my brain at the moment. Trying to get people to attend conferences, and just like the happy eventualities. The friends you'll make, the things you'll learn, the things that you'll take away. So yeah, thanks Marty for joining us on episode 9.
Thank you very much for having me
of the Ripples podcast. Excellent. We look forward to seeing you again. You're in Adelaide now, so I should be able to find some reason to see you between now and November. Hopefully I'll get to see you again.
If I go out the door and wave, you'll be able to see me, won't you? Adelaide, that small place where you can see everything.
Well, there's no tall buildings to get in.
That's right. No, I see everything and everyone.
I do need to say to this though. So
That's right.
If I look out that way, I see the city. If I look out that way, I see the hills. So we are actually in a really good location here. And I think if maybe if your hair was still coloured from Laracon days, Michael. Yeah, if it was still coloured, I reckon I'd be able to see it from looking out over the city. So yeah, not too far away.
Excellent.
Well, okay. You can. Well, you want to do the wrap, Mike?
Well,
I seem to be doing it all the time lately.
Do the wrap. All right. Well, you can find us on Twitter, on YouTube at Ripples FM. You can find show notes for this episode at ripples.fm. Marty is on Twitter at Marty Friedel. Greg is at Greg Skerman, and I'm at Michael Dorinda. And until next time, I hope to see you making waves.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.